makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
If you have been listening to all the debates regarding the Russian Ukrainian war on the left, and especially among the online left, you'll probably have encountered a fella named John Mearsheimer. Now, John Mearsheimer is someone who probably no leftist knew who he was until a couple of days ago. But it just so happens that I did know who he was. In fact, I read him read one of his books called The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. I've been meaning to read another one of his books called The Great Delusion Liberal Dreams and International Realities, because I broadly share his view of how wishy-washy the liberal notion of international relations is. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with him with everything else that he says. And specifically, I have a lot of issues with how Mearsheimer has been framing the current conflict, because Mearsheimer has basically used the same argument that now a lot of leftists have been using, that this is not really a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's really, Ukraine is merely a proxy of a broader conflict between Russia and the West. And the West has really been, since the end of the Cold War, pushing towards Russia's borders, creating a situation in which Russia has apparently no other option but to invade a sovereign country and, possibly annex good chunks of it, destroy its culture, etc. Apparently, that is okay. That is how states should respond to being encroached. So, before we get into the nitty gritty, we need to fit Mearsheimer, and we need to fit this argument of NATO being the ultimate evil in this conflict into the two dominating schools of thought in international relations, which is one is realism. So the realists basically believe that the world operates as a game between great powers. So think of you're playing Civilization, the computer game, kind of like that. It's a very non-normative way of looking at the world, and it basically just says that your best type of foreign policy is one in which takes into account the fact that all of these states around the world behave, entirely in self-interested ways and will do whatever they can to achieve those objectives, including going to war. And Mearsheimer isn't just a realist. He's part of a school of thought that's even more, I would say, belligerent in that sense. It's called offensive realism. That is, states will preempt any threat to their security or any threat to their foreign policy objectives by going to war if necessary. So that is why he basically has framed this conflict within this school of thought, of that Russia is being the one that is reacting to Western imperialism and encroaching. And that has been basically music to the ears of a lot of leftists, because I have seen no shortage of leftists quoting Mearsheimer as an expert on these things. Like, quite ironic, because he teaches at the University of Chicago, the most right wing university with regards to economics and other subjects. But yeah, that is what can I say? What can I say? Anyway, here's a description of offensive realism. A theory of international relations holds that states are disposed to competition and conflict because they are self-interested, power maximizing, and fearful of other states. More so, it argues that states are obliged, key word here, obliged to behave this way because doing so favors survival in the international system. So let's consider the fact that we live in an international system where it is rare for states to not exist anymore. Since World War II, actually since much earlier, I would say since World War One, we have had a proliferation of new states, whereas old states do not cease to exist. So it is very interesting. I mean, if you want to describe the medieval period under offensive realism, you can probably get away with it because, yeah, losing a war in 14th century Europe might mean that your little principality will become part of a larger kingdom or empire. That was normal back in the day. It is not normal now for states to not exist. Quite the contrary. It is more likely that new states will exist because of you know, the international system broadly favors, not always, with the same consistency, but the self-determination of peoples. So there is, in the post-colonial period, you had the new states that were former colonies. After World War One, you had all these new states in Europe that were formerly part of the big monarchies, like Austria-Hungary. You had the partition of Yugoslavia, etc. So this idea that you need to go to war because your country faces an existential threat is the main problem of offensive realism, because it doesn't seem to apply in a situation like today's modern international system where states are not really destroyed the way that they used to be. So do you really need to go to war? Like, is Russia at risk of ceasing to exist? Does Ukraine represent an existential risk to Russia? The answer is categorically no. Categorically no. Even if Ukraine became part of NATO, became part of the EU, none of that represents an existential risk to Russia. That is a fact. Even if NATO put bases in Ukraine, which it had no plans of doing, because NATO, in fact, did not set up a single base in Eastern Europe, in any of the new Eastern Europe countries, until 2016 as a result of the Crimea conflict. And even then, these are very small bases. Like, the US does not have the same kind of presence in Poland or the Baltic states that it does in what was West Germany. Okay? So this idea that even Ukraine joining NATO was some kind of existential threat to Russia is ludicrous. Ludicrous. And it does not justify an invasion in any way. Okay? So, let's look at how Mearsheimer has. So Mearsheimer published an article, I think it was sometime around 2014, which blamed the West for the Crimea crisis at the time. That is a text along with some of the speeches that he's given at universities, which a lot of leftists online have been quoting, saying, look, see, all these foreign security experts agree with me, who, closet pro-Putinite. But let's look at how he basically fumbles through his own arguments. And before I show the interview that the New Yorker gave him, which I thought, if you can't read that interview and still come out with a conclusion that Mearsheimer knows what the fuck he's saying, okay? Pure. Just deal with that. But I want to show another piece which involves Mearsheimer kind of indirectly, but also deals with something that is very true. The idea that we should use people like Mearsheimer or any other kind of Western policy experts that just so happens to fit this narrative that NATO is to blame completely denies the views that Eastern Europeans themselves have on their relationship with Russia and their relationship with the West. And this is very important. And this article calls it Westsplaining, which I definitely think is very appropriate. And so I'm just going to read 2 bits of this essay. I'm going to put the link of this one as well as the interview on the description so you can read the whole thing. But I just want to read 2 sections. So the first one is kind of a recap of who is giving this argument of NATO expansion is the real cause of this. And it's sadly a lot of very prominent people on the left and on the far right as well. So horseshoe theory warning. In recent weeks, this argument has caught on across the political spectrum, has made bedfellows of Ted Galen Carpenter of the Libertarian Cato Institute and the seminal German leftist intellectual Wolfgang Streeck, who wrote that the war over Ukraine, the framing of the war over Ukraine. Dude, you're fucking invading Ukraine. Exploded out of the uncompromising brinkmanship on part of both the US and Russia. It has united the economist Jeffrey Sachs, who I should add is probably more to blame through through the shock therapy policies that he advocated for Russia. You know, him and people like other economists like Andrew Schleifer probably have more to blame than NATO does. But anyway, has united the economist Jeffrey Sachs, apparently cured of his intoxication with neoliberalism, but not from telling Eastern Europeans what to do, and Greek anti-neoliberal politician Yanis Varoufakis. Fox News' Tucker Carlson and progressive economist Maria Mazzucato both likened the situation to China convincing Mexico to join an anti-American security alliance. For the record, if Mexico was being threatened by the US, you're damn fucking right that we would have the right to set up any alliance, whether it's with China or with Russia or whoever. You are damn right that we would have that option. Anyway. The Guardian's political communist Owen Jones, of course, always Owen Jones, suggested that the war could have been avoided because had there been an attempt to craft a neutral buffer zone after the Cold War. The tweet in question has since been deleted, and Jones apologized for ignoring the rights of the people living in said zone and sounding like an imperialist playing risk with the people of Europe. The implication is also there in a tone-deaf statement released by the Democratic Socialists of America that called for an end to the war but blamed imperialist expansion for leading it. Yep, I saw that. I criticized it on Twitter. Same with the statement from the Stop the War Coalition in the UK, which also put out a poster for anti-war protest, and they wrote they wrote end Russian aggression, and then they wrote no to NATO expansion, but they wrote the no to NATO expansion in a bigger and louder font than the other one. So it's clear what they really are pushing for. They're a bunch of clowns, I should add. Anyway, here's the... Yeah, so this is the key point. And this is, I cannot stress how important understanding this paragraph, especially if you're a leftist, who always gives the argument of like the West never listens to local voices. You know, the West silences local voices. Well, guess what? You're fucking doing that as well. You're fucking doing that as well. Because if you ask any Eastern European who they think is the bigger threat, NATO or Russia, they will all say Russia. Categorically. Because they know their history more than you, dumbass. Anyway. As much as US militarism and imperialism should be criticized, it has to be acknowledged that in Eastern Europe, it is not the US or NATO who have been an existential threat. In the 20th century, the formative experience for the countries of the region was direct and indirect Soviet control. States like Hungary, Czechoslovakia, or Poland, through nominally independent, were not free to pursue their own policy, either domestic or foreign. Hungary and Czechoslovakia were invaded by the Soviet Union when they tried to steer off Moscow's prescribed course. Poland's Soviet-imposed authorities brutally repressed popular protest in 1956, twice in the 1970s, and in 1981. Ukraine didn't even have the luxury of formal independence, and for their opposition to forced collectivization, Ukrainians paid a dear price. Holodomor, the deliberately engineered famine, killed between 3 and 12 million people. Eastern Europe, apparently, according to the Tankies, this did not happen. So genocide denial is very common on the left as well. Eastern European calls for NATO and EU membership stem from the historical experience of oppression. Any analysis that does not acknowledge it is doomed to be incomplete at best and false at worst. And then goes on to explain that these countries, this is also a point that I have been tirelessly trying to explain to idiots on Twitter for the past couple of days. NATO did not expand into Eastern Europe. Eastern European countries, democracies whose societies wanted to join NATO, made that choice to do so, often amid some actual reluctance on NATO's part. If you don't understand this bit, you don't give a fuck about democracy in these countries. You don't give a fuck about these countries' rights to choose their means of security. All you care is for Russia to have a sphere of influence and control over the foreign policies of the countries around it, just because you think that sphere of influence is somehow a counter to NATO. That in this zero-sum binary world that you live in, Russia's imperial power detracts from the imperial power of the US and the West. And that is absolutely idiotic. Absolutely idiotic. Yeah. So that is, yeah, look at the polls. Pew Research Center shows Eastern European members generally see NATO favorably. 53% of Czechs have a positive opinion, as do 77% of Lithuanians. NATO's most enthusiastic supporters are Poles, with 88% supporting the alliance. 53% of Ukrainians view NATO favorably. So, what's the deal? Do they not have a right to do so? Anyway, now we move to the interview. And I really, like I said, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read a few bits. But please, I'm going to link it. Please read it, because it is ridiculous. This is the worst interview that I have seen of someone who, pretends to have some semblance of expertise in what he's talking about, especially towards the end. And I am going to read that part. So let's see, where is where is this? Yeah, you keep saying turn Ukraine into a liberal democracy, and it seems like that's an issue for the Ukrainians to decide. NATO can decide whom it admits, but we saw in 2014 that it appeared as if many Ukrainians wanted to be considered part of Europe. It would seem like almost some sort of imperialism, to tell them that they can't be a liberal democracy. And he responds, it's not imperialism, this is great power politics. So fuck you, Ukrainians. You have no say, no agency whatsoever in how you want to make a future for yourselves. You're just a pawn to this great power politics that I could mentally masturbate to and sell books. This guy really just doesn't have a concept of the world much different than a game of Civilization played against a mediocre AI. That is Mearsheimer in a nutshell. When you're a country like Ukraine and you live next door to a great power like Russia, you have to pay careful attention to what Russia thinks, because if you take a stick and you poke them in the eye, they're going to retaliate. What fucking stick, mate? One fucking stick. Are you invading Russia? Are you attacking Russia? You're not. There's no threat to Russia. Jesus Christ. States in the Western Hemisphere understand this full well with regards to United States. So the problem is, and I wrote a Substack piece before the war explaining why this is using Mearsheimer as your argument for understanding this conflict makes you fall, from a leftist perspective, falls into the is-ought problem, which if you know a bit of philosophy, you know that you can't make a normative statement that is an ought, that is justified through is statements, that is things that facts. And the evidence here is obvious, like this idea that Russia should have a sphere of influence, and you're justifying it by the fact that the US has a sphere of influence. That is not argumentatively compatible. Because guess what? The US also shouldn't have a sphere of influence. Latin America shouldn't be the US's backyard. And certainly no leftist would argue that, right? Because if China decides to have its backyard, then are leftists going to be like, well, the US should have a backyard because China has a backyard? That doesn't work, right? Are you going to justify, for example, the Mexican-American War when the U.S. was not yet a great power or an imperial power? Are you going to say that was okay because, well, Britain had an empire, it had its own sphere of influence, so why can't the U.S.? Screw Mexico. Ridiculous arguments, absolutely ridiculous arguments. So again, he just saying that the US would not allow countries in the Western Hemisphere to ally with others, and his response is, we do have that say. And in fact, we overthrew democratically elected leaders in the Western Hemisphere during the Cold War because we were unhappy with their policies. This is the way great powers behave. So again, this is completely non-normative. This is just like, this is the state of the world. What can we do about it? I guess the Holocaust was fine because that's the way great powers work. This is beyond ridiculous that any leftist uh, backs any argument with Mearsheimer. Of course we did, but I'm wondering if we should be behaving that way. So here, this is what the interviewer is doing. He's saying like, well, what's your normative position, John? What should they be doing? Well, again, that's not the way the world works. So he's not even addressing this point. He's not even saying, in John Mearsheimer's mind, there is no existence of any normative statement whatsoever. It's just what happens, and that validates itself. This is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. When you try and create a world that looks like that, you end up with the disastrous policies that the US pursued during the unipolar moment. We went around the world trying to create liberal democracies. Our main focus, of course, was in the greater Middle East, and you know how well that worked out. Now, the interviewer is really good. I really love the work that he did because he counters that brilliantly. I think it would be difficult to say that America's policy in the Middle East in the past 75 years has been to create liberal democracies in the Middle East or Latin America, because the U.S. mostly supported very far-right regimes, and I think that's what the Bush doctrine was during the unipolar. Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? In Iraq, but not in the Palestinian territories or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or elsewhere, right? Well, no. So now he backtracks to start with the Bush doctrine. Basically said if we could create a liberal democracy in Iraq, it would have a domino effect. Yeah, okay, dude. Okay, dude. God, this is so ridiculous. Yeah, so he questions the argument that Mearsheimer gave, supporting this idea that NATO was to blame for the Crimea crisis. According to prevailing wisdom in the West, the Ukraine crisis can be blamed almost entirely on Russian aggression. Russian President Vladimir Putin, the argument goes, annexed Crimea out of a long-standing desire to resuscitate the Soviet Empire, and he may eventually go after the rest of Ukraine, as well as other countries in Eastern Europe. But then you say, but this account is wrong. Does anything that's happened in the last couple of weeks make you think that account was closer to the truth than you might have thought? I think I was right. I think the evidence is clear that we did not think he was an aggressor before February 22nd, 2014. This is a story that we invented so that we can blame him. My argument is that the West, especially the United States, is principally responsible for this disaster. But no American policymaker and hardly anywhere in the American foreign policy establishment is going to want to acknowledge that line of argument, and they will say that the Russians are responsible. You mean because the Russians did the annexation and invasion? Yes. Oh God. Oh God. And this is the part where he just is even lying flat in the interviewer's face. I was interested in that article because you say that the idea that Putin may eventually go after the rest of Ukraine as well as other countries in Eastern Europe is wrong. Given that he seems to be going after the rest of Ukraine now, do you think in hindsight that argument is perhaps more true, even if we didn't know it at the time? It's hard to say that he's going to go after the rest of Ukraine, because I don't mean to nitpick here, but that implies that he wants to conquer all of Ukraine and that he will turn to the Baltic states, and his aim is to create a greater Russia, or the reincarnation of the Soviet Union. I don't see evidence at this point that this is true. By the way, Putin, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, basically just said that if Ukraine doesn't stop, unless Ukraine stops fighting, the very whole question of their statehood is up in the air. So he is probably willing to annex all of Ukraine if he can. It is difficult to tell what he's up to. It seems quite clear that he's going to take the Donbass, and that the Donbass is going to be either 2 independent states or 1 big independent state. But beyond that, it's not clear what he's going to do. I mean, he does seem apparent that he's not touching Western Ukraine. Yeah, because that's the farthest from the fronts, and there's no major cities there. Jesus Christ, how stupid can you be? His bombs are touching it, right? Yeah, but that's not the key issue. What he's dodging every single question. You don't think he has designs on Kyiv? No, I don't think he has designs on Kyiv. I think he's interested in taking at least the Donbass and maybe some territory in eastern Ukraine. And number two, he wants to install a Kyiv, a pro-Russian government, a government that is attuned to Moscow's interest. I thought you said that he's not interested in taking Kyiv. Please, if you're a leftist who believed in this guy as the voice of what is going on, kill yourself now. Seriously, kill yourself now. This is embarrassing. No, he's not he's interested in taking Kiev for the purpose of regime change. Okay. As opposed to what? As opposed to permanently conquering Kiev. It would be a Russian-friendly government that he would presumably have some say over, right? Yes, exactly. But it's important to understand that it's fundamentally different from conquering and holding into Kiev. Do you understand what I'm saying? Oh, God. And then he goes into like semantics. I have problems with your use of the word imperial. I don't know anyone who talks about this whole problem in terms of imperialism. Dude, you are. You're literally saying that Russia is, well, first of all, you're basically saying that Western imperialism is to blame, and then you're saying that Russia has a right to its own imperialism as a response to Western imperialism. This is great power politics. Yeah, that's imperialism, you dumb fuck. God almighty. That's it. I really just You're saying that he's not going to invade them in part because they're part of NATO, but they shouldn't be part of NATO. I think he's referring to the Yeah, he's referring to the Baltics. So this is why NATO has justified its existence, thanks to fucking Putin. That is exactly why. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Yeah, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. Yeah, read the whole interview. Like I said, if you read this and you still think, if you're still gonna take your foreign policy views on this conflict from John Mearsheimer, I'm sorry, you're an idiot. There's no other way to describe this. You're an idiot. You should not be commenting on foreign relations with arguments this nonsensical and ridiculous. And more importantly, arguments that deny the agency, A, of the abuser in this conflict, the invader, the one who is committing the war crimes. You're denying them the agency of what they're doing. And last time I checked, that was not something leftists did, to ever deny the agency of people doing bad things. And two, you're denying the agency of Ukrainians, as well as everyone else in Eastern Europe, to decide their security arrangements, to decide what countries they want to be closest to. No, you are saying that Russia has an inherent right to a sphere of influence, and that is categorically wrong. So, don't know how much more clear this can be, but yeah, read those two articles and decide for yourself. And on that note, if you like this video, please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.